Hello, good morning. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to crochet this pair of summer shorts. Ta-da! Shorts! If you're new here, hi, my name is Yejia. I create free crochet tutorials and take you along my crochet journey. If you love what I do and you'd like to support me, please consider becoming a Patreon member, and thank you to all my Patreon members. Here's the cool list of benefits that you'll get. And yeah, without any further ado, let's get started with the tutorial. To begin these shorts, you are going to need your first yarn color. If you're making this whole thing in one color, this is less applicable, but if you are utilizing multiple colors, make sure to start off with the color that you want for your waistband portion. And for the waistband portion, I'm going to be using a 3mm sized hook. This is going to be slightly smaller than the hook size that I'm going to use for the rest of the shorts. For the waistband, I just want it to be really quite cinched and really have that sort of elastic effect. And I find that sizing down your hook when creating an elastic waistband is really beneficial for that purpose. I feel like I can already see the comments. No, it's not a big deal if you use, the same hook size all throughout. Your measurements and the number of chains and the number of stitches and number of rows that you're gonna work are probably gonna be a little bit different. Also, don't mind my nail beds being quite cracked because I peeled off my gel manicure. I'm going to start off with my white yarn, and I'm going to go ahead and begin with a slip knot. So again, to create a slip knot, we're going to wrap the yarn around these two fingers, twist, and then pull up your working yarn. Go ahead and slide that on and tighten it up. So for myself, I'm going to start off with a chain of 25. Your last two chains are not going to be worked, and they are your turning chains. So in total, I am going to be working 23 stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and start chaining 25. So I have now chained 25 chains. Essentially, this is going to be the length of the waistband. So if you want a longer waistband, go ahead and make more chains. If you want a shorter waistband, chain fewer chains. The ribbing is really up to personal preference. If you want to do it using a single crochet, a half double crochet, if you want to go through the back loop only instead of the third loop only, all up to you. A lot of these ribbing techniques tend to produce really similar looking outcomes. There are just very slight differences with different ribbing techniques, but use the ribbing technique that you are most familiar with. For me personally, I'm going to be doing yarn over slip stitch. So these first two, or I guess last two chains that you've created, but first two on this row, the first two chains here you are going to skip. You're not going to work those. We're also going to slightly twist our work so that we're working into the backs right here, the backs of our chains. I'm going to go ahead and skip those first two. I'm starting off with a yarn over on my hook. Skipping those first two, I'm going to insert my hook into the back of my third chain from my hook, yarn over, and slip through all loops on your hook. So I think I went through that kind of fast, so let me do it again. So yarn over, insert your hook into your next back, yarn over, pull that yarn over up and through, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull that yarn over up and through all the loops on your hook. So I'm just going to continue creating these yarn over slip stitches through the backs of my chains until I am at the end of my row. Okay, so I have now arrived at my last stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that off. This is what the end of your first row should be looking like, just like so. And then you're going to chain 2 as your turning chains, turn your work. So again, we're going to start using the yarn over slip stitches, but I'm specifically going to go through the third loop only. This is your third loop only, right here. You're going to go ahead and do your yarn over slip stitch. Now, in case that's a little confusing, if you're kind of just starting out and you really want to do this ribbing technique, usually standard wise, you would be putting your hook underneath the front and the back loops of your stitch, right? But your third loop only, is this front loop right here. Not to be confused with like the actual front loop, but it's this sort of like loop right here that you see on the front of your work. And by working through the third loop only, you're kind of forcing the braiding to be on alternate sides. And then again, I am at my last stitch, and that is going to be right here, right there. I'm gonna do my yarn over slip stitch and then chain 2, turn my work. So I'm gonna continue creating my rows of yarn over slip stitch through the third loop only until I have a panel that is large enough to wrap around right above my hips. The measurement is kind of like in between the smallest part of my waist and my hips. So in total, I believe I have created about 140 rows. Generally with a waistband, I don't love counting the amount of rows just because it really is kind of the same thing over and over and over again. And instead I tend to go more so based off of measurements. Now, in terms of measurements, this waistband panel is just about 27 inches in length. And in terms of height or width, we are looking at about 2.5 inches. So I try to show you guys the measurements of the panels, even though I'm like explaining, oh, you should be able to slide it over your hips, you should be able to wear it right around here on your body, etc., etc. And I want to like help you guys as much as possible by showing you the measurements of the panels and the parts of the garment that I'm creating, but I will still receive a lot of comments that ask me for like my exact body measurements, and personally I don't feel comfortable sharing my exact body measurements with you guys. That's just gonna have to be a mental health boundary that I'm gonna have to make on this channel, so I hope you guys can understand. But anyways, I have worked my last row, which I believe was my 140th, and I am now ready to seam the sides of my panels together. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 1, kind of turn my work, and then I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook into the same like third loop that we have been working into, and then I'm going to go ahead and insert my chain into the first chain from my very first like starting chain. Then I'm going to yarn over and slip stitch that all together. So again, I'm going to go through the third loop only, and then going into the chain from my first like row of chains, I'm going to slip stitch my work all together. So again, through the third loop only, into the actual like proper chain, and then slip stitch all of it together. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue my slip stitch seam all the way down the sides of this panel. Okie doke, so I am now done with slip stitch seaming my waistband together. As you can see, this is the wrong side of my work because you can see that really obvious seam and you can really feel it too. And then when you flip it inside out, ooh, she's so pretty and seamless. So this is the right side of your work and this is going to be the wrong side of your work. This is going to be important to keep track of as we create the rest of the shorts. So just keep it in mind for now, but essentially when you are done, you can go ahead and pull out your yarn and then go ahead and trim the excess off. All right, so that is waistband done. Definitely make sure that you are trying this on and making sure that this can slip over your hips. But just in general for measurements, I wear generally an X small to a small, and this panel, this waistband panel, is measuring out to be right around 27 inches. So you are going to need 3 bobby pins or stitch markers or pieces of yarn, whatever you want to use. So we are going to mark out every quarter from the seam that we've created, every quarter of the total length of your waistband. So if you want to be like super precise about it and you're following along, you know, my exact measurements and all of that, that would indicate that with my 140 total rows divided by 4, I'm going to be marking out every 35 rows approximately. But honestly, you can just kind of fold it and make sure that the seam is in the middle, and then just kind of eyeball it. You'll be fine. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and mark out the first quarter of my waistband, and then I'm gonna mark out the other quarter on the other side. And then from here, again, you can either count out the actual row count, or you can just approximate the middle by being the opposite side of your middle stitch, middle seam area here. So again, just to recap, you have your slip stitch seam, and then a quarter length of your waistband away from that, you have your first stitch marker. Another quarter away or halfway away from the seam, you are gonna make another, or put another stitch marker, another quarter away, stitch marker. So I'm now gonna bring in my blue yarn for the actual short portion. So, you know, use your secondary yarn color or continue with your first. I feel like I should have mentioned that if you're just continuing with your first color, you don't need to cut your yarn. So I'm really sorry if you already have, but you don't need to. Anyways, we are now going to switch from our 3mm hook to our 3.5mm hook. And another really big reason why I'm changing my hook sizes is because I'm changing the stitch type that I'm using. So with certain stitch types, I think that it's better if you actually size up your hook, and then other stitch types, it's better to size down your hook. It's very dependent on the specific stitch that you're using, as well as what you want the outcome of your final panel or product to look like. But yeah, I am going to be using a 3.5mm hook, and I am going to be using the Suzette stitch to create these shorts. Now we are going to start off by creating a slip knot with our blue yarn. I am now taking my 3.5mm hook, and I am going to insert my hook into the first sort of gap or space in which I want to start connecting the shorts to the waistband. Now let me zoom you in. Because we're working into the sides of our rows, there's not like a really obvious stitch to insert your hook. Instead, what I always recommend when connecting panels like this, always insert your hook underneath 2 strands of yarn. So right now I only have 1. And then I'm gonna go ahead and kind of play around and insert my hook underneath a second strand of yarn. So as you can see, there's not like a very good specific place that I can show you that this is like exactly where you insert your hook, but you basically just go into the sides of your rows here. And if you want to prevent from really awkward gapping in between your waistband and the rest of the shorts, I would recommend inserting your hook underneath 2 strands of yarn, just like you see here. So I'm going to take my slip knot and slip it onto my hook. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up as well. So it's tightened, and then I'm going to go ahead and slip that slip knot up. And from here, I'm going to be chaining for the length of my shorts. Let me zoom you back out. If you want shorter shorts, go ahead and chain fewer chains to begin with. And if you want longer shorts, go ahead and chain more chains to begin with. But I'm gonna be starting off with 36 chains. Now, when you're working the Suzette stitch, you want to start off with an even number of chains. So again, if you're gonna go longer, make sure to just start with a greater even number of chains. And if you want the shorts to be shorter, go ahead and start with an even number of fewer chains. So I'm going to start chaining. So 1, 2, 3. So I now have my 36 chains to begin with, as you can see. And we are going to skip that first chain. That's going to basically act as our turning chain. And we're gonna work into the backs of our chains again. But I'm gonna slightly turn my work to work into the back bump right here, into the second chain from our hook. And then the Suzette stitch is going to be 2 stitches in 1 stitch. So the first stitch is going to be a single crochet. To do a single crochet, you're going to start with a yarn over, pull up, yarn over once more, pull through 2. And then we're going to do a double crochet in the exact same chain back that you did. And to do a double crochet, you're going to start off with a yarn over, Insert your hook into the exact same stitch as you did your single crochet, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops on your hook. You should be getting this little cluster of stitches, and then you're going to skip the next chain, insert your hook into the next one. Now I'm going through the backs of my chains, and then we're going to create a single crochet, single crochet, and then we're going to create a double crochet in the exact same stitch. This is what it should start looking like. Skip the next chain, go into the next chain, single crochet, and then double. So I'm going to continue creating my Suzette stitch down the length of my chain, and I'll show you once I get down here sort of where I'm inserting my stitches, how it looks, etc., etc. I'll often also see a lot of people ask for help because their panels suddenly drastically got smaller, and usually if it's not a tension issue, it's because of a counting issue. And unless you are wanting to count every single stitch for every single row that you create, I think it's better to start learning how to read your stitches to understand when you are at the beginning and end of a row, because I tend to find, especially like when I remember when I first started out crocheting, that the times when I would decrease stitch count a lot or like accidentally increase it was always like at the beginning or end of a row. The middle part's usually fine. It's like the beginning and end of a row that's always kind of a struggle. So I will make sure to show you guys a couple of times. Okay, so I'm at my last couple of stitches here, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip this guy, and I'm gonna go into my very last chain. Your last chain is gonna have a little bump that looks like this, and that is what you're going to work your stitches into. So now I'm going to start slip stitching the rest of my work onto the bottom edge of the panel, or the waistband panel, and I'm going to use 1 slip stitch. So I'm going to again go into the next sort of gap that I see, making sure that I insert my hook underneath 2 strands of yarn. Sorry, this is my blue yarn end in the way. But I have put my hook underneath 2 strands of yarn. I'm going to go ahead and yarn over and then create a slip stitch. When I'm creating these slip stitches, I make sure to keep my tension quite tight, and then I'll turn my work, and then you're going to skip the first stitch, which should have been a double crochet stitch, and then you're going into the next stitch, which is your single crochet stitch that you worked, and you're going to create your Suzette stitch, which is the combination of your single crochet and your double crochet being worked into the same stitch. Skipping the next stitch, going into the single crochet, you're going to create a single crochet as well as a double crochet. Skip into the next one, single crochet, double crochet. Then I'm going to continue creating my row until the very end. Okay, so I'm at the end of my row, and again, you can kind of see where you might start dropping off some stitches. You were going to skip this stitch, your double crochet, into the last one. Especially on this first row, it can look kind of rounded over, which can make it kind of hard to see and easy to miss. So this is where you should be inserting your last couple of stitches. So there's your single, and then into the same stitch, you're going to insert your double. And you know, even if you've changed up the stitch count, you should always be starting off your row with a single crochet and ending it with a double crochet. So now we're going to chain 1 and turn our work, and then I'm going to go ahead and into my single crochet. So I'm skipping that first double crochet chain or stitch, and then creating my Suzette stitch. And then once I get back up to the waistband, I will show you again how I attach it. Okay, so I'm at the end of my row, and again, it can look a little funky, but make sure to go into your actual last stitch which should look right there. It can get really crumpled up in the seaming that we're doing in between the shorts and the waistband. So I just want to show you guys again how that looks. And then now we are going to go ahead into the next little gap where I see right here. Again, if I only put my hook underneath this one strand of yarn, I'm gonna be dealing with some awkward gapping in between the rest of my shorts and the waistband panel. So I'm essentially going to make sure that I go underneath a second strand of yarn right there to sort of close up that gap. And then giving myself one tight slip stitch. I'm going to turn my work, and then I'm going to go ahead and continue my Suzette stitch. The first 5 times that you are going to connect back to the waistband, you are only going to use one slip stitch. And as you can see, by creating this with only one slip stitch, you're essentially creating 2 rows of Suzette stitch to every 1 row that you did here on your waistband. So that's why it's kind of puckered in here and it's bigger, because we're not working in a 1-to-1 ratio, we're working in a 1-to-2 ratio, which is increasing the size of these shorts so that it can actually have some shaping to it and isn't just like a rectangular panel. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish off my last one slip stitch connection, and I just want to show you the wrong side of my work. And I know it's the wrong side of my work because I can feel that seam right there. You can see like that double seam, right? But essentially I am counting these little V's that I see at the waistband. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 right there. And that's how I know that I've done 5 connections. When you are only working one slip stitch into the waistband, you are essentially increasing the size of the shorts. So now I've worked my 11th row back up towards my waistband, and I am going to use 2 slip stitches in order to connect the rest of my shorts to the waistband. So again, I'm using 2 slip stitches, making sure to keep my tension again quite tight when I am doing these slip stitches, turning my work, and then working my Suzette stitch, you know, as per normal, as per usual. And I'm looking again at the wrong side of my work, and you can start seeing the differences between the 1 slip stitch seam versus the 2 slip stitch seam. The 2 slip stitch, you're kind of getting this like almost like square rectangular little shape right here, and then versus the 1, you're just seeing that V. So that's how you can keep track of how many slip stitches you used and how many times you've used those slip stitches. So I am going to continue actually working in multiples of 5 1 slip stitches, 5 2 slip stitches, 5 1 slip stitches, 5 2 slip stitches, etc, 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 until I get to my first stitch marker. Okay, so I reached my stitch marker and I already started working a couple of rows. As you can see, this is where my stitch marker is at. But essentially, once I reached my stitch marker, I basically, this quarter of my shorts, I ended it in the 1 slip stitch connections, and then after I reach the slip stitch or the stitch marker, I'm going to continue to do just the 1 slip stitch connections. Just to recap, for the first quarter of the shorts on the waistband here, I have created rows using 5 times only 1 slip stitch, and then 5 times using 2 slip stitches, and then 5 times only using 1 slip stitch, 5 times using 2 slip stitches, and then right before I got to my stitch marker, I used only 1 slip stitch 5 times, right? As soon as I went past my stitch marker, I did 5 1 slip stitches. And then for the rest of the part of the waistband, this is going to be the front of my shorts, so I actually don't need it to be as shaped and have so many increases. I really just needed to include some increases to account for my hips, but other than that, I have, as you can see, done 2 slip stitches for the rest of my waistband here. So again, as soon as I went past the first quarter, I did 5 1 slip stitches, and then the rest of the approximately 30 rows here, I've done 2 slip stitches. So now I am halfway done with my shorts, and I am at the halfway point, as you can see by my stitch marker, and I've already incorporated that in a 2 slip stitch combo right here. And then as I work this up, I'm going to again utilize 2 slip stitches all the way up until about 5 rows before my next stitch marker. Hopefully you can see this, but essentially I have worked about half of the shorts, and in the back half I created several increases in order to account for, you know, my butt. And then on the front here, I've really only made increases at the hips. Other than that, I've worked in a 1-to-1 row ratio, 1 row of Suzette stitch per 1 row on the waistband. And so now we are looking at basically, this would be like the halfway point down the front of your shorts. Now we are going to separate out those legs. So you're going to work the Suzette stitch all the way down, and then you're going to stop to account for the leg portion at which, you know, your legs are going to separate here. So for myself, I'm going to leave 8 stitches unworked on this row. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue working my Suzette stitch all the way down, and stopping before working the last 8 rows or 8 stitches of my row. So I have stopped before working my last 8 stitches. So 2, 4, 6, 8. Those are my last 8 stitches. And now I am going to chain. So I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to go ahead and start off with 8 chains and turn my work. And then just for continuity, I am not going to go into the backs of my chains, but instead I'm going to kind of go through the actual chain itself. And what I mean by that is I'm going to skip that first little chain I've got right there, and then I'm going to go underneath the actual sort of chain that you see here. So everything except for the back loop, essentially. So right there. And then I'm going to create my single crochet, and then my double crochet into the same chain. And then I'm gonna go ahead and skip the next little chain right here, going into the next chain, into the whole chain proper, like that. I'm gonna give myself a single crochet, and then a double crochet into the same chain, skipping, going into the next chain, gonna give myself a single crochet, and then a double crochet, and then skipping into my last chain, gonna give myself a single, and then a double, and then from here on out you can work your stitches as per usual. And if you want a longer sort of inseam, then create more chains and make sure to count off or stop before working that total number of chains. Basically, whatever number of chains you decide you want your inseam to be, also make sure to create chains and kind of make up for that on the other side. Because as you can start to kind of see, we are forming the second leg, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and continue working rows and rows and rows of Suzette stitch. And again, because I'm working on my front half where I don't wanna make too many increases, I am going to connect with 2 slip stitches all the way up until my last 5 rows right before my stitch marker. This distribution of how many times you do 2 slip stitches versus 1 slip stitch can really vary. It definitely depends on how you want this garment to fit. If you want it looser, then I would suggest inserting even more just 1 slip stitches. If you want it tighter, then I would recommend utilizing more 2 slip stitches. So it really is going to depend on how you want your shorts to look and fit on you. And so play around with it and see what combination of 1 versus 2 slip stitches work best for you. But I'm gonna go ahead and continue creating all of my rows, and I'll check back with you once I'm at my next stitch marker. So I wanna do a little check-in. Essentially, you know, the back is going to be worked the same way, and then the front is going to be worked the same way, but just so we have an idea of what we're looking at. This quarter of the waistband is going to be worked very similarly as this quarter of your waistband, in which I'm going to be working 5 1 slip stitch connections, 5 2 slip stitch connections, etc, etc, etc. So again, if we look on the inside or the wrong side of our work, it's a lot easier to be able to see where we have created 1 slip stitches, 2 slip stitches, 1 slip stitch, 2 slip stitches, right? So again, just to recap, we started off with 5 1 slip stitch connections, then we have 5 2 slip stitch connections, then we have 5 1 slip stitch connections, 5 2 slip stitch connections, and then 5 1 slip stitch connections. This is getting to be quite the tongue twister. Okay, and then we worked on the front side here, right? The front side, we worked with 5 1 slip stitch connections, and then the rest are all 2 slip stitch connections, all the way up until you get to your next stitch marker, which is the halfway point, right? And then that is about 15 total 2 slip stitch sections or connections that I've worked. And then once I worked that, I then created the slit to separate our legs. And then I again worked 15 2 slip stitch connections. As you can see, it's like the straight line across that look, that is indicating to you that I've worked 2 slip stitches. And then right before I got to my little bobby pin or stitch marker, I worked 5 single or 1 slip stitch connections. And you can see those by the little V's that connect the rest of my shorts to the waistband itself. And you can see it on the wrong side of your work. So now I'm gonna do 5 1 slip stitches, 5 2 slip stitches, 5 1 slip stitches, 5 2 slip stitches, 5 1 slip stitches. Okay, so I have now finished all of my rows. In terms of measurements, the smallest parts of the part of the shorts that meets the waistband is approximately 14 inches. And then total on the bottom edge, we're looking at closer to 20 inches. And then folded in half for one of the legs, I'm looking at just about 10 inches. Oh, 10 inches. You want to end on the slip stitch at the waistband right here, because now we're going to start seaming the sides of our panel together. I'm going to flip my work so that I know that I'm looking at the inside of my work, because I see the obvious seam from the waistband portion right here, and I kind of see some ends that are sticking out, which is supposed to be the inside of my work. And then I'm going to stack my panels together, and I'm going to slip stitch seam the sides of the panel together up until the last 8 stitches. And again, if your inseam stitch count is different, then go to whatever inseam stitch count you did for the front. So I did 8, so I'm gonna go ahead and slip stitch this all together until I reach the last 8 stitches. So to do your slip stitch seam, you are just going to insert your hook underneath, 1 stitch on one side of the panel, and then 1 stitch on the other side of the panel, yarn over and pull up, and then repeat for all the other stitches. So my seam is all slip stitched up, and now I am going to be creating basically like the inner thigh of your shorts, just to connect the front and back together. Now the basic premise of how I'm going to create this is I'm going to increase the length of this inner thigh portion. I have found that if you just continue like the same inseam stitch count here, it can tend to kind of ride up following the natural curve of your body, and to sort of counter against that, I would recommend adding several stitches to the length of it in order to make it a little bit longer. And I'm going to ignore this side. I'm just going to work on this side, and I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook into the first single crochet space here, and then I'm going to give myself the regular Suzette stitch. And then on this last stitch, I'm actually going to put in 2 more stitches. So a single and a double. So the last stitch here, it's a single, double, single, double. Then we're going to chain 1, turn our work, and I'm going to create one more increase. So I'm ultimately increasing my stitch count to 12 total. And then from here, I'm not going to make any more increases. I'm just going to work the 12 stitches that I have. I'm going to continue creating a panel so that when I try it on and I wear it, I know that this panel is going to stretch from the back to front comfortably, and it's not like super tight, and it's also not super loose. And I'm going to be doing 13 total rows of this 12, and then I'm going to make a decrease and then slip stitch it to the front side of our leg right here. But I'm going to go ahead and make 13 rows. So at this point I have done my 2 rows of increases and then 13 rows, just no increases or anything, just working regular Suzette stitch. And now I'm ready to make my decreases so that my stitch count matches the stitch count for the inseam here. So to make my decrease, all I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the first stitch where I should be putting in my stitches. I'm only going to put in 1 single crochet, and then I'm going to move on to the next stitch to make a double crochet. So you've just now decreased your stitch count by 2, and then you're going to go ahead and finish off the row just like usual, and then you can go ahead and turn and then go ahead and work all the way back down to the edge where you are decreasing. And now I'm at my last 4 stitches, so I'm going to create a decrease, and that is going to be just 1 single crochet into my next actual stitch, and then I'm going to create 1 last double crochet into that last stitch right there. So now I should be back at 2, 4, 6, 8 stitch count. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 1, turn my work. Now it's time to slip stitch seam these 2 sides together, right? Because this is one leg, and then it'll connect to this front inseam portion. And then once I've finished my slip stitches, I'm going to go ahead and pull out my yarn. So now you have the inner thigh panel here. I'm going to go ahead and make a slip knot and attach my yarn and basically do the exact same process as you did here onto here, slip stitch it all together, and then you should have like a little hole at the end, and I'll show you how I seam it up. But I'm going to go ahead and create this other inner thigh panel first. Okay, so now I have both of my inner thigh panels done, and I am actually just going to go ahead and pull out my yarn. And there are multiple ways that you can go about doing this part now, but you can either take your crochet hook and actually just like slip stitch seam everything together. I'm going to go ahead and take a tapestry needle, and then I'm going to make sure that like every little gap is kind of closed in and accounted for, and then I'm just going to go ahead and sew the seam together. Okay, so I'm going to show you really quick how to make the drawstring or the waistband tie. So you're going to start off with your slip knot, go ahead and slip that onto your hook, and then you are going to start off with 2 chains, so 1, 2, just like so, and then you're going to twist your work slightly, so you're going to go into the back of your first chain, yarn over, and pull that yarn over up and through. And then you're going to insert your hook into your previous loop, the side right there, yarn over, and pull up. Once again, you're going to put your hook underneath the previous loop you've created, yarn over, and pull up. And then just for reference, my finished braided chain is just about 52 inches. And then you can go ahead and weave it in and out of the sort of top portion here. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and like weave it in and out of the waistband portion right here. So just like so. You can weave it in and out. And then for the bottom edge, you know, you can really add an extra ribbing. I am probably personally going to go ahead and just do a single crochet hem around the edge of the pants, or the shorts particularly, just to kind of blend in the increases and decreases that I've made, kind of close up some of those awkward gaps. But it's really optional at this point. You could also totally add a pocket. I created this like rough draft of a pocket, and it's really just a square of the Suzette stitch all over again, and then you can seam it to the back to add a little pocket if you like. But yeah, that is how you create the shorts. Ta-da! These are the final shorts. They're so comfy and I can't wait to lounge around in them in the summer. I feel like they'd be perfect for like the poolside or the beach side, but I actually don't know how to swim, so I'd probably be very unlikely to be at those places. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. Let me know if you guys have any questions or requests down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!